The orc woman's fingers trembled as she watched the human warrior strip off his blood-soaked shirt, revealing a torso marked with scars that told stories she desperately wanted to hear. And in that breathless moment, Olena Ashford realized that everything her clan had taught her about humans being weak and undesirable was a lie she could no longer believe. She had been standing at the edge of the forest clearing for nearly an hour, hidden among the dense pines, watching the human camp below. Her orders had been simple: scout the human settlement that had been established near the border of orc territory, report back on their numbers and defenses, and leave without being seen. But nothing about this mission had gone according to plan, starting with the moment she had witnessed the attack. The raiders had come from the north, a mixed group of bandits and deserters who preyed on isolated settlements. Olena had watched from her vantage point as they descended on the small homestead, their intentions clear and brutal. She should have stayed hidden. Her father, the clan chieftain, had made it abundantly clear that humans were not their concern, that any conflict between human factions was an opportunity for orcs to strengthen their own position. But when she saw the lone warrior trying to defend what appeared to be his home against overwhelming odds, something inside her had shifted. Against every instinct of self-preservation and clan loyalty, she had intervened. Her crossbow had taken down 3 of the raiders before they even knew they were under attack from a new direction. By the time she emerged from the tree line, war axe in hand, the human warrior had rallied, and together they had driven off the remaining attackers. The fight had been brutal and efficient, and when it ended, she found herself standing in a stranger's yard, breathing hard, covered in blood that was not her own, staring at a human man who looked at her not with fear or disgust, but with something she could not quite name. "You saved my life," he had said, his voice rough from exertion and what might have been emotion. "I do not know why you helped me, but thank you." Olena had not known what to say. In all her 23 years, she had never been this close to a human outside of battle. She had certainly never had one look at her with gratitude rather than hatred. She had muttered something about evening the odds and turned to leave, but he had called out to her, "Wait, you are injured." She had looked down at her arm, surprised to see a deep gash running from her shoulder to her elbow. The adrenaline of combat had masked the pain, but now that he mentioned it, she could feel the hot throb of the wound. She had shaken her head, insisting it was nothing, but he had been insistent. "Please, let me at least clean and bind it. It is the least I can do." Something in his tone, or perhaps the genuine concern in his dark eyes, had made her pause. Her clan's healer was 2 days' journey away, and infection was a real concern. Against her better judgment, she had agreed. That had been 3 hours ago, and now she found herself sitting on a rough wooden bench outside his cabin. Her armor removed and set aside, watching as Quinn Marlowe drew water from his well and began to wash the blood and dirt from his own body before tending to her wound. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the clearing was quiet except for the sound of water and the evening songs of birds. Olena knew she should look away. It was improper to stare, even by orc standards, and yet she found herself unable to tear her gaze from him. Quinn was not what she had expected a human to be. The humans in her father's stories were weak, soft creatures who relied on numbers and treachery to survive. But this man was clearly a warrior, his body lean and hard from years of training and labor. Every movement revealed muscles that shifted beneath skin, marked with the evidence of a life lived in combat. A long scar ran across his ribs on the left side. Another crossed his shoulder blade. Burns marked his forearms, the kind that came from working a forge or perhaps from fire in battle. He turned slightly, reaching for a cloth, and she caught sight of his face in profile. He was handsome by human standards, she supposed, though she had little experience to judge by. His jaw was strong, covered with several days' worth of dark stubble. His hair, nearly black, was tied back in a simple tail, though strands had come loose during the fight. But it was his eyes that held her attention whenever he looked her way. They were a deep brown, almost black in certain lights, and they held a depth of experience that spoke of loss and survival. "I apologize for staring," she said suddenly, the words coming out more abruptly than she intended. "It is just that you are not what I expected." Quinn looked up at her, surprise flickering across his features before a small smile curved his lips. "I could say the same about you." He wrung out the cloth and began to dry himself. "I was raised to believe orcs were mindless savages who lived only to raid and destroy. Yet you chose to help a stranger at great risk to yourself. That does not match the stories I was told." Olena felt her tusks catch her lower lip as she considered his words, a nervous habit she had carried since childhood. "My father would say I was a fool for intervening. Humans and orcs are not meant to be allies. We are meant to be enemies or at best indifferent to each other's suffering." "And what do you say?" Quinn asked, pulling on a clean shirt. The fabric was simple homespun cotton, but it was clean and mended with care. He gathered his medical supplies and approached her, kneeling beside the bench so he could examine her wound more closely. "I say that I do not know any more," Olena admitted quietly. "I have never questioned my father's teachings before today. But when I saw those raiders attacking you, when I saw you fighting alone against those odds, I could not simply watch. It felt wrong." Quinn began to clean her wound with gentle, efficient movements. His touch was careful, and Olena found herself acutely aware of the warmth of his fingers against her skin. Orcs ran naturally warmer than humans, but somehow his touch felt like fire against her arm, sending shivers through her body that had nothing to do with pain or cold. "You are very brave," he said softly, his attention focused on his work. "Not just for fighting, but for questioning what you were taught. That takes a different kind of courage." "Or foolishness," Olena said, but there was no heat in her words. "I am supposed to return to my clan tomorrow with information about human settlements in this area. Now, I will have to decide whether to report that I broke our clan's neutrality to save a human's life." Quinn paused in his work, meeting her eyes. "Will you be punished for helping me?" "Possibly." "Probably," Olena sighed. "At the very least, I will be shamed. My father is already disappointed in me. I am not the warrior he wanted for a daughter. I am too soft, he says, too given to mercy and sentiment." "I think mercy is a strength, not a weakness," Quinn said firmly. He returned his attention to her wound, applying a salve that smelled of herbs and honey. "Though I am obviously biased, given that your mercy saved my life today." Olena watched him work in silence for a moment, studying the concentration on his face, the care he took not to cause her unnecessary pain. "Why are you alone out here?" she asked. "This is dangerous territory, far from any major human settlement." "Most humans would not dare live so close to orc lands." Quinn's hands stilled for just a moment before continuing their work. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, touched with old grief. "I came here because I needed to be far from civilization, from people and their expectations and their wars. I served in the border conflicts for 7 years, fighting battles that had no real meaning, watching good men die for causes that served only the ambitions of nobles and kings. When my service ended, I took my savings and came here to build something different, something peaceful." "You chose to live alone?" Olena asked, surprised. "Humans are social creatures. At least, that is what I was taught." "Most are," Quinn agreed, beginning to wrap her wound with clean linen. but I found that I could not go back to ordinary life after what I had seen and done. The noise of towns, the constant press of people, it all felt suffocating. Here, I have silence, space to think, a chance to build something with my own hands rather than destroy what others have made. There was something in his tone that resonated with Olena deeply. She understood that feeling of not quite fitting in with your own people, of wanting something different from what was expected. "I know what you mean," she said quietly. "My whole life, I have been told that a proper orc woman should be fierce and unyielding, should take pride in battle and seek glory in combat. But I have always felt that there should be more to life than fighting. My mother says I inherited my grandmother's spirit. She was a healer and a storyteller, and she believed that strength could take many forms." Quinn secured the bandage and sat back on his heels, examining his work with a critical eye. "Your mother sounds wise. And for what it is worth, I think fighting the way you did today, protecting someone not of your own people despite the cost to yourself, that shows more strength than 100 warriors who fight only for glory." Olena felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, a feeling she could not quite name. She looked down at her bandaged arm, at the careful, even wraps that spoke of skill and practice. "You have done this before, tended wounds in the field." "Many times," Quinn confirmed, standing and offering her his hand to help her up. "In the army, we learned quickly that knowing how to patch up your brothers could mean the difference between them seeing another dawn or bleeding out in some forgotten field." Olena took his hand without thinking, allowing him to help her to her feet. The moment their hands clasped, she felt that same jolt of awareness she had experienced when he had touched her arm. His hand was calloused and warm, strong but not crushing. For a long moment they stood there, hands joined, neither quite willing to break the contact. It was Quinn who finally let go, stepping back and clearing his throat. "It will be dark soon. The raiders might return with reinforcements looking for revenge. You should stay here tonight. It is safer than traveling through the forest after dark, and your wound needs rest." Olena knew she should refuse. Every moment she spent here was a moment of risk, a moment that could be discovered and reported. But the alternative was traveling through unfamiliar territory in the dark with an injured arm, and that seemed even more foolish. Besides, a part of her that she was not quite ready to examine too closely wanted to stay, wanted to spend more time in Quinn's presence, learning about this human who defied all her expectations. "I will stay," she said finally, "but only until first light. I have already risked too much by being here." Quinn nodded, relief evident in his expression. "I understand. Come, let me show you inside. I can offer you a hot meal at least and a safe place to rest." The inside of Quinn's cabin was simple but well kept. It was a single large room with a stone fireplace on one wall, a sleeping area in one corner, and a small kitchen area in another. Shelves lined the walls, holding books, tools, and various supplies. Everything was organized and clean, speaking of a man who took pride in his space despite living alone. What surprised Olena most were the books. There were at least 24 of them, more than she had expected a frontier settler to own. She moved closer to examine them, reading the titles embossed on the worn leather spines. Histories, books on agriculture and animal husbandry, a few volumes of poetry, and several texts on metalworking and craft. "You raid," she said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Quinn looked up from where he was stoking the fire, a slight smile on his face. "I do. Does that surprise you? Most warriors I know have little use for books," Olena admitted. "My father believes that reading makes men soft, that the only knowledge worth having is what can be learned through experience and passed down through stories." Books are just another way of preserving experience and stories, Quinn said, moving to his small kitchen area and pulling out supplies to cook. The advantage is that you can learn from people who lived centuries ago, or in places you will never visit. After the war, reading helped me make sense of what I had been through. Other men had fought, had struggled with the same questions I had. Their words helped me find my way when I was lost. Olena moved to the rough wooden table and sat down, watching Quinn as he prepared their meal with the same efficient, practiced movements he had used when tending her wound. "What did you do before you were a soldier?" she asked. "I was raised on a farm, much like this one," Quinn said, cutting vegetables and adding them to a pot hung over the fire. "My family grew wheat and raised chickens. I was the youngest of 4 sons, which meant I was not going to inherit the land. When the recruiters came through our village looking for men to serve in the border wars, I volunteered. It seemed like a way to make my own fortune, to become someone other than the youngest son of a farmer." "Do you regret it?" Olena asked. Quinn was quiet for a long moment, stirring the pot thoughtfully. "I regret the things I saw and the things I did. I regret the friends I lost and the innocence I can never get back. But I cannot regret the path that led me here to this place and this life. Even with all its hardships, I have found more peace in this cabin than I ever knew in my father's house or in the army." He ladled stew into 2 wooden bowls and brought them to the table, along with fresh bread and a pitcher of water. The smell was heavenly, rich with herbs and vegetables and something else Olena could not quite identify. "Rabbit," Quinn said, noticing her curious expression. "I set snares in the forest. Along with my garden, it keeps me fed without needing to rely on supply runs to distant towns." Olena took a spoonful of the stew and nearly groaned at the taste. It was simple food, but it was well prepared and seasoned with care. Her clan's food was often heavy and practical, designed to fuel warriors but not necessarily to please the palate. This was different, crafted with attention and skill. "This is wonderful," she said honestly. "You have many talents, Quinn Marlowe." Quinn smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes and made him look years younger. "I have had a lot of time to practice." When you live alone, you either learn to cook well or you suffer through terrible meals. I chose the former. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the crackle of the fire and the scrape of spoons against bowls the only sounds. Olena found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did, even among her own people. There was something about Quinn's presence that felt safe, unthreatening despite the obvious strength he possessed. "Tell me about your clan," Quinn said after a while. "What is it like, living among your people?" Olena considered the question, trying to find words that would make sense to someone who had not grown up in orc society. "It is structured and traditional. Everyone has a role, a place they are expected to fill. Warriors are honored above all others, followed by hunters and craftsmen. Those who show mercy or hesitation in battle are seen as weak, a potential liability to the clan's survival." "And where do you fit in that structure?" Quinn asked gently. "Nowhere comfortably," Olena admitted. "I am the daughter of the chieftain, which gives me certain privileges but also certain expectations. I am expected to be a perfect example of orc values, to be fierce and strong and uncompromising. But I have always been too curious, too willing to ask questions and consider alternatives. My father has 3 other daughters, all of whom fit the mold better than I do. I think he wishes I had never been born, or at least that I had been born as the son he wanted instead." The bitterness in her own voice surprised Olena. She had never spoken these thoughts aloud before, had barely admitted them to herself. But something about Quinn's patient attention, the way he listened without judgment, made the words come tumbling out. I am sure your father loves you, Quinn said carefully. Even if he does not always understand you. Perhaps, Olena said, though she was not convinced. But love and disappointment can exist side by side. He loves the idea of what I should be, but he is disappointed by who I actually am. Quinn reached across the table and gently placed his hand over hers. The gesture was simple, meant to be comforting, but the moment their skin touched, Olena felt that same electric awareness spark through her. She looked up and found Quinn staring at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then he is a fool, Quinn said softly, because the person you actually are is someone brave and compassionate and thoughtful, someone worth knowing. Olena could not find words to respond. Her heart was hammering in her chest, and she was acutely aware of every point where their bodies were close. This was wrong, she told herself. Humans and orcs did not feel this way about each other. It was unnatural, forbidden by both their peoples. And yet she could not deny what she was feeling, could not pretend that this connection between them was anything other than what it was. Quinn seemed to realize the moment had become too intense. He pulled his hand back and cleared his throat, standing to collect their empty bowls. You should get some rest. You have had a long day and your body needs to heal. Olena nodded, grateful for the excuse to step back from whatever had been building between them. Where should I sleep? Take my bed, Quinn said, gesturing to the sleeping area in the corner. I will keep watch by the fire in case those raiders return. I cannot take your bed, Olena protested. You are injured as well, and this is your home. I insist, Quinn said firmly. You are my guest, and you saved my life today. It is the least I can do. Olena wanted to argue further, but the truth was that she was exhausted. The combination of the long day's travel, the fight, the injury, and the emotional upheaval of the evening had left her drained. She nodded her acceptance and moved to the sleeping area. The bed was simple, a wooden frame strung with rope and topped with a mattress stuffed with straw and wool. The blankets were clean and smelled faintly of cedar and wood smoke. Olena removed her boots and outer clothing, keeping on the simple tunic and leggings she wore beneath her armor. She climbed under the blankets and was astonished by how comfortable it was, how the mattress seemed to cradle her tired body. From her position on the bed, she could see Quinn settling into a chair by the fire, his sword within easy reach. He had added more wood to the flames, and the firelight cast dancing shadows across his face. He looked tired but alert, every inch the warrior he had been trained to be. Quinn, she called softly. He turned to look at her, his expression questioning. Thank you, she said, for your kindness. For treating me like a person rather than a monster. Something shifted in Quinn's expression, something soft and warm that made Olena's heart skip. You could never be a monster, he said simply. Sleep well, Olena. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the fire and the exhaustion in her bones pull her toward sleep. But even as she drifted off, she could not shake the image of Quinn's face, or the feeling of his hand on hers, or the way her heart raced when he looked at her with those dark, knowing eyes. Olena woke to the smell of cooking and the soft light of dawn filtering through the cabin's small windows. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then memory returned in a rush. The fight, the injury, Quinn's kindness, and the confusing tangle of feelings that had kept her hovering on the edge of sleep for far too long. She sat up carefully, testing her injured arm. It was sore and stiff, but the pain was manageable and there were no signs of infection. Quinn's field medicine had been expertly applied. Quinn himself was at the small kitchen area, cooking what appeared to be eggs and some kind of grain porridge. He had already been outside, she realized. His hair was damp, and there were fresh buckets of water near the door. Good morning, he said when he noticed her stirring. "How is your arm?" "Better than expected," Olena said, swinging her legs out of bed and standing. She moved her arm through a range of motion, testing the limits of the injury. "You did excellent work." "I am glad," Quinn said, dividing the food between two plates. "I hope you are hungry. I was not sure what orcs typically eat for breakfast, so I made what I usually have." "This is fine," Olena assured him, moving to the table. "Food is food, and I am not picky." They ate together, and Olena found herself studying Quinn in the morning light. He looked tired, and she suspected he had not slept much if at all during the night. Guilt pricked at her conscience. He had given up his bed and his rest for her comfort and safety. "Did the raiders return?" she asked. "No," Quinn said. "The night was quiet. I think we genuinely frightened them off. They were expecting an easy target, not a coordinated defense." Olena nodded, finishing her breakfast. "I should go. I have already stayed longer than is wise." She stood and moved to gather her armor and weapons, but Quinn's voice stopped her. "Will you be in trouble? With your clan, I mean, for helping me and for staying here?" Olena turned to face him, considering the question carefully. "I do not know. It depends on what I choose to tell them and whether anyone else saw what happened. If my father learns that I intervened to save a human, he will be furious. But if I simply report that I encountered raiders and eliminated a threat near our border, that could be seen as proper action." "You would lie to protect me?" Quinn asked, and there was something complex in his voice. Gratitude, certainly, but also concern. "I would tell a version of the truth that protects us both," Olena corrected. "You saved my life by tending my wound. I saved your life by fighting at your side. We are even, and there is no need for either of our peoples to know more than that." Quinn stood and crossed to her, helping her fasten the buckles on her armor that were difficult to reach with an injured arm. His fingers were quick and sure, and once again, Olena was struck by how naturally they worked together, how right it felt to have him close. "Will I see you again?" Quinn asked softly, his hand stilling on the final buckle. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Olena knew what the smart answer was, what the safe answer was. She should say no, should walk away from this cabin and this human and never look back. But when she opened her mouth, different words came out. "I scout this region regularly. My father sends me out every few weeks to monitor human activity along the border. It would not be unusual for my path to bring me past this clearing again." Quinn smiled, and the expression transformed his whole face. "Then I hope your path brings you this way soon. I will keep supplies on hand in case you need anything. Medical supplies, food, whatever might be useful." "That would be appreciated," Olena said formally, but she could not keep the answering smile from her own face. She finished gathering her belongings and headed for the door. Quinn followed her outside, and they stood together in the early morning light, neither quite ready to part ways. "Be careful out there," Quinn said. "Those raiders might be gone, but there are other dangers in these woods." "I will," Olena promised. Then, acting on impulse, she reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. "You be careful as well. Build your peaceful life, Quinn Marlowe. You have earned it." She turned and walked toward the tree line, forcing herself not to look back even though every instinct urged her to. She could feel Quinn's eyes on her until she disappeared into the shadows of the forest, and even then, she swore she could sense his presence like a warmth at her back. The journey back to her clan's settlement took 2 days, and Olena spent most of that time trying to sort through the tangle of her thoughts and feelings. She had met a human, fought beside him, been treated with kindness and respect, and felt things she had never experienced before. Everything she had been taught said that these feelings were wrong, impossible, a betrayal of her people and her heritage. But her heart told a different story. When she arrived at the settlement, She went directly to her father's longhouse to make her report. Crag Ashford was a massive orc, even by the standards of their people. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and arms thick with muscle earned through decades of combat. His tusks were long and sharp, and his face bore the scars of 100 battles. He was intimidating to enemies and allies alike, and Olena had spent her entire life trying and failing to earn his approval. "You return later than expected," Crag said without preamble when she entered his hall. "What delayed you?" "I encountered raiders near the border," Olena reported, keeping her voice steady and professional. "A mixed group, perhaps a dozen strong. They were attacking a target in the area. I eliminated the threat before they could establish a base that might have endangered our territory." It was not quite a lie. Everything she said was technically true. She simply omitted the detail that the target had been a human homestead, and that she had fought alongside rather than alone. Crag grunted, which might have indicated approval or simply acknowledgement. "You eliminated a dozen raiders alone. They scattered after I killed 3 of them from range and engaged 2 more directly," Olena explained. "They were undisciplined and poorly armed. Once they realized they faced organized resistance, they fled. Again, all technically true. And your injury?" Crag asked, gesturing to her bandaged arm. "A lucky strike during the engagement. I cleaned and bound it in the field. It is healing well." Crag studied her for a long moment with his cold, calculating eyes. Olena forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching, knowing that any sign of weakness or deception would be noticed immediately. "You did well to eliminate a potential threat," Crag said finally, "but you should have returned immediately for proper treatment of that wound. What if it had become infected? You could have died alone in the wilderness and your knowledge would have died with you." "I apologize, Father," Olena said, bowing her head slightly. "I will be more cautious in the future." "See that you are," Crag said dismissively. "You are excused." "Have the healer look at that arm." Olena bowed properly and left the longhouse, relief flooding through her. Her father had believed her report, or at least had not questioned it enough to probe deeper. She was safe, and by extension, so was Quinn. Over the following weeks, Olena fell into her usual routine. She trained with her clan's warriors, participated in hunts, and helped with the various tasks required to keep a settlement running. But her mind was elsewhere, counting down the days until she could reasonably volunteer for another scouting mission in the border region. Her sister, Athia, noticed her distraction. "You have been strange since you returned from your last mission," Athia commented one evening as they worked together to repair fishing nets. "Did something happen that you did not report?" Olena's hand stilled for just a moment before continuing their work. "Nothing happened. I am simply tired." "The scouting missions are long and lonely." "Then why do you volunteer for them so often?" Athia asked, her tone knowing. "Most warriors would prefer assignments that involve more action and glory, but you always choose to wander the borders alone." "I like the solitude," Olena said, which was partially true. "It gives me time to think." Athia snorted. "You think too much. Father says it is your greatest weakness." "Father says many things," Olena replied, unable to keep a slight edge from her voice. Athia looked at her sharply, then seemed to decide to let the matter drop. "Just be careful, little sister. Whatever it is that has you so distracted, make sure it does not get you killed." 3 weeks after her first meeting with Quinn, Olena volunteered for another border scouting mission. Her father approved without comment, and she set out with her supplies and weapons, her heart beating faster than the exertion of travel warranted. She told herself she was simply checking on the region, making sure the raiders had not returned and that the border remained secure. But she knew the truth. She was going back to see Quinn, to see if the connection she remembered had been real or simply a product of an intense situation and her own loneliness. She approached Quinn's clearing cautiously, moving silently through the trees as she had been trained. She could see smoke rising from the cabin's chimney, a sign that he was home. The clearing looked different than it had during her last visit. There were new additions: a small chicken coop, an expanded garden, and what appeared to be the beginning of a larger structure near the tree line. Olena stepped out of the forest, and immediately a figure emerged from the cabin. Quinn had been watching for her, she realized, waiting to see if she would return. "Olena," he said, and the warmth in his voice made her chest tighten. "I hoped you would come back." "I was in the area," she said, trying to sound casual. "I thought I should check that the raiders had not returned." Quinn smiled, a knowing expression that said he understood exactly why she was really there. "They have not. It has been quiet. Would you like to come inside? I have food, and I made sure to keep those medical supplies stocked in case you needed them." "My wound has healed well," Olena said, but she moved toward the cabin anyway. "Your field medicine was excellent." "I am glad to hear it," Quinn said, holding the door open for her. Inside, the cabin looked much as it had before, though there were small changes. More books on the shelves, a nicer set of cooking pots, fresh herbs hanging to dry near the ceiling. "You have been busy," Olena observed. "I made a supply run to a town 2 days north of here," Quinn explained. "I needed nails and some other supplies for the new building I am constructing. While I was there, I picked up a few other things." He moved to a shelf and pulled down a package wrapped in cloth. "Including this. I thought of you when I saw it." Curious, Olena took the package and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a book, its leather cover embossed with an intricate design of leaves and vines. She opened it and found pages covered in beautiful illustrations of plants and herbs, with notes on their properties and uses. "It is a healer's guide," Quinn explained. "You mentioned your grandmother was a healer, and I thought you might be interested in learning more about the craft. The illustrations are beautiful, even if you do not read the human script." Olena stared at the book, then at Quinn, unable to quite process what he had done. He had thought of her while he was away. He had seen something and believed she would appreciate it, had spent his own money to purchase it for her. It was such a simple gesture, and yet it touched her more deeply than she could express. "Thank you," she said softly. "This is incredibly thoughtful." "I wanted you to have something to remember me by," Quinn said, then seemed to realize how that sounded. "I mean, in case you decided not to come back, or if circumstances made it impossible for you to visit again." Olena set the book down carefully on the table and turned to face Quinn fully. "I wanted to come back. I have thought about little else since I left." Quinn took a step closer. "I have thought about you constantly. I told myself I was being foolish, that you were probably relieved to leave and get back to your own people. But I could not help hoping that what I felt, what I thought we shared, was real." "It was real," Olena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is real, and it terrifies me." "Why?" Quinn asked, moving closer still. "Because it is impossible," Olena said, frustration and longing warring in her chest. "Because my people and your people have been enemies for generations. Because if anyone in my clan discovered that I had feelings for a human, I would be exiled at best. Because even if we wanted to be together, there is no world in which that would be allowed or accepted." Quinn reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face with one hand. His palm was warm against her cheek, and Olena found herself leaning into the touch without conscious thought. "I know all of that," Quinn said quietly. "I know every rational reason why this is impossible, but I also know that I have never felt this way about anyone before." When I am near you, the world makes sense in a way it has not since before the war. You make me want to be better, to build something meaningful instead of just hiding from the past." Olena closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the intensity of her feelings. "I do not know what to do. I do not know how to want something this much when I know I cannot have it." "Then do not think about the future," Quinn said. "Do not think about your clan or my people or any of the obstacles between us. Just be here now in this moment. Let yourself feel what you feel without judgment or fear." Olena opened her eyes and found Quinn staring at her with an expression so full of longing and tenderness that it made her heart ache. She had come here telling herself she just wanted to check on him, to make sure he was safe, and to assure herself that the connection between them had been real. But the truth was much simpler and much more complicated. "I have never wanted anyone like this before," she whispered, the admission torn from somewhere deep inside her. "You make me feel things I did not know I could feel." "Then stay," Quinn said. "Stay with me for as long as you can. We will figure out the rest as we go." Olena knew she should be sensible, should protect her heart and walk away before this went any further. But sensible had never been her strong suit, and in this moment, with Quinn's hand on her face and his eyes promising things she was afraid to name, she could not bring herself to leave. "I can stay for 3 days," she said. "After that, I will need to return with my report or my absence will be questioned." 3 days, Quinn repeated, a smile spreading across his face. "I will take whatever time you can give me." Those 3 days were the happiest of Olena's life. She and Quinn fell into an easy routine, working side by side during the day and talking late into the night by the fire. Quinn showed her the new building he was constructing, which would serve as a workshop for metalworking. He had been a smith's apprentice briefly, before joining the army, and he hoped to supplement his farming income by crafting tools and simple weapons to trade. Olena helped him with the construction, her orc strength making short work of tasks that would have taken Quinn much longer alone. In return, he taught her about human agriculture, showing her techniques for crop rotation and soil enrichment that her people did not use. They cooked together, shared stories of their childhoods, and slowly revealed the deeper parts of themselves that they usually kept hidden from the world. On the second evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Quinn finally asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. "What will you do if your father discovers the truth about us, about your feelings?" Olena had been expecting this question, had been thinking about it herself. "I do not know," she admitted. "The best scenario is that he exiles me from the clan. The worst is that he would send warriors to kill you as a lesson to others who might consider consorting with humans." Quinn's expression darkened. "I would not let anyone hurt you because of me." "It would not be about you," Olena said gently. "It would be about me defying our most sacred traditions, choosing an outsider over my own blood. In my father's eyes, that would be the ultimate betrayal." "Then we will need to be careful," Quinn said. "I will not risk your safety or your place in your clan." "I think that decision has already been made," Olena said softly. She reached out and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "From the moment I chose to help you fight those raiders, I set myself on this path. I cannot regret it, even knowing the consequences." Quinn raised their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender that Olena felt tears prick at her eyes. "You are the bravest person I have ever met," he said. That night, Olena lay in Quinn's bed while he took his usual place by the fire. But sleep eluded her, her mind too full of thoughts and her body too aware of Quinn's presence mere feet away. Finally, unable to stand it any longer, she got up and moved to where he sat. "Quinn," she said softly. He looked up at her, concern immediately crossing his face. "Are you all right? Does your arm pain you?" "No," Olena said. She knelt beside his chair, bringing them eye to eye. I just did not want to be apart from you. Even that small distance felt like too much. Quinn's breath caught, and he reached out to brush a strand of her dark hair behind her pointed ear. I know what you mean. Every moment you are near me, I have to fight the urge to touch you, to hold you. Then do not fight it, Olena said, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. We have such little time together. I do not want to waste it pretending we do not feel what we feel. Quinn stood, pulling her up with him, and for a moment they simply stood there, hands clasped, staring at each other in the firelight. Then, moving with a kind of desperate inevitability, they came together. The kiss was everything Olena had imagined and nothing like she expected. Quinn's lips were soft but firm, moving against hers with a hunger that matched her own. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, needing to eliminate even the smallest space between them. They broke apart gasping, and Olena could see her own wonder reflected in Quinn's eyes. I have never kissed anyone before, she admitted breathlessly. We do not do that in orc culture, but I have heard humans do, and I wanted to try. Did you like it? Quinn asked, his voice rough with emotion. Yes, Olena said simply. Can we do it again? Quinn laughed, the sound full of joy, and pulled her back to him. They kissed again, slower this time, learning the shape and taste of each other. Olena's tusks required some adjustment in positioning, but Quinn adapted quickly, finding angles that worked for them both. When they finally broke apart again, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. Stay with me tonight, he said softly. Not for anything beyond this, just to be close. I want to fall asleep with you in my arms and wake up knowing you are near. Olena nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. They moved together to the bed, lying down fully clothed atop the blankets. Quinn wrapped his arms around her, and Olena tucked herself against his side, her head resting on his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. This is perfect, she whispered. Yes, Quinn agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. It is. They lay there in the darkness, hands clasped between them, and Olena felt a sense of peace and rightness that she had never experienced before. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever consequences they would face, she knew in this moment that she had found something precious and rare. She had found someone who saw her not as a disappointment or an oddity, but as herself, and who loved her for exactly who she was. On the morning of the third day, Olena knew she could delay her departure no longer. She and Quinn rose early, neither wanting to waste a moment of their remaining time together. They ate breakfast in near silence, the weight of the parting ahead of them making words difficult. As Olena gathered her gear and prepared to leave, Quinn pressed a small bundle into her hands. Supplies, he explained. Dried meat, herbs for medicine, some coin in case you need it. I know you are capable of taking care of yourself, but let me help however I can. Olena accepted the bundle, touched by his thoughtfulness. When will I see you again? When can you return? Quinn asked. Not for at least a month, Olena said reluctantly. Maybe longer. If I volunteer for border scouting too frequently, it will raise questions. Quinn nodded, though disappointment flickered across his face. A month, then. I will count the days. They stood at the edge of the clearing, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Finally, Olena cupped Quinn's face in her hands and kissed him deeply, pouring everything she felt but could not say into the gesture. Be safe, she whispered when they broke apart. Do not take unnecessary risks. I could not bear it if something happened to you. I will be careful, Quinn promised. You do the same, and Olena, thank you for giving me hope, for showing me that the future can be more than just solitude and survival. Olena forced herself to turn and walk toward the forest. This time, She did look back just once to see Quinn standing where she had left him, watching her go. She raised a hand in farewell, and he returned the gesture. Then she was among the trees, and Quinn's clearing disappeared from view. The month that followed was the longest of Olena's life. She went through the motions of her daily routine, but her heart and mind were elsewhere. She caught herself constantly thinking of Quinn, wondering what he was doing, whether he was safe, whether he thought of her as often as she thought of him. Her distraction did not go unnoticed. During a training session, she failed to block an obvious strike and took a hard hit to her ribs. The warrior who struck her, a male named Groth, laughed mockingly. "Your mind is elsewhere, chieftain's daughter," he taunted. "Perhaps you are too soft for real combat." Olena bit back a sharp retort and reset her stance, forcing herself to focus. She could not afford to let her guard down like that again. Any sign of weakness would be reported to her father, and scrutiny was the last thing she needed. That evening, as she applied salve to her bruised ribs, her mother entered her dwelling. Eartha Ashford was smaller than her husband but no less formidable. She had been a renowned warrior in her youth, and even now in her middle years, she commanded respect from the clan. "Your father tells me you have been distracted," Eartha said without preamble. "He is concerned that you are losing your edge." "I am fine," Olena said, not meeting her mother's eyes. "I simply had a moment of inattention during training." Eartha studied her daughter for a long moment. "You have never been a good liar, Olena. Something is troubling you. Is it a male in the clan? Has someone dishonored you?" "No," Olena said quickly. "Nothing like that." "Then what?" Eartha pressed. She moved closer and sat down beside Olena, her expression softening slightly. "You know I am not like your father. I do not believe that strength means never showing emotion or admitting struggle. Talk to me, daughter." Olena wanted desperately to confide in someone, to share the burden of her secret, but she knew she could not fully. "I have been thinking about my future," she said carefully, which was at least partially true. "About what my life will be like as the chieftain's daughter. Father will eventually arrange a mating for me with someone he believes will strengthen the clan. I will be expected to produce strong children and support my mate's ambitions, but I do not know if that is what I want." Eartha sighed. "I know your father can be difficult. He has very fixed ideas about how things should be. But he does want what is best for you, even if his definition of best is limited." "What if what is best for me is not what he would choose?" Olena asked. "What if I wanted something different from what is expected?" Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "Then you would have to decide whether that different path is worth the price you would pay for choosing it. Our clan values tradition and loyalty above almost everything else. Defying those values would have consequences." "I know," Olena said quietly. Eartha reached out and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Your grandmother used to say that the heart knows truths the mind cannot understand. She believed that following your heart, even when it led somewhere difficult, was a form of courage. I thought she was foolish when I was young, but as I have grown older, I have come to see the wisdom in her words." Olena looked at her mother in surprise. "You never talk about grandmother." "Your father does not approve," Eartha said simply. "He believes her influence made me too soft, too willing to question our traditions. But she was wise in ways he cannot understand, and I see much of her in you." "Thank you," Olena whispered. Eartha stood to leave but paused at the entrance. "Be careful, Olena. Whatever path you are considering, make sure you understand the full cost before you commit to it. And know that while I may not be able to protect you from your father's anger, you will always have my love." After her mother left, Olena sat in the darkness of her dwelling, thinking about her words. The full cost of her choices. She understood that cost in abstract terms, but the reality of it had not fully hit her until now. If she continued to pursue a relationship with Quinn, she would eventually have to choose between him and her clan, between love and duty. There was no middle ground, no compromise that would satisfy both sides. The question was, which could she live without? 2 weeks after her conversation with her mother, Olena finally had a legitimate reason to volunteer for a border scouting mission. Reports had come in of increased human military activity in a region adjacent to where Quinn lived. Her father needed intelligence on whether this represented a threat to their territory. Olena took the assignment without hesitation, her heart racing at the prospect of seeing Quinn again. The journey to the border took 3 days this time, as she needed to scout the military encampment before heading to Quinn's clearing. What she found troubled her. The humans had established a forward base with perhaps 200 soldiers, armed and equipped for sustained operations. This was not a patrol or a temporary presence. This was the beginning of an expansion into territory that had previously been unclaimed buffer zone. If the humans continued to push into this area, it would eventually bring them into direct conflict with her clan's territory. Her father would have to respond, probably with force. And Quinn's homestead sat directly in the path of any expansion. After gathering what intelligence she could, Olena made her way to Quinn's clearing. It was late afternoon when she arrived, and she could see Quinn working in his garden, his shirt off despite the cool autumn air. She stood at the tree line for a moment, just watching him, memorizing the sight. Then Quinn looked up, as if sensing her presence, and a smile of pure joy spread across his face. He dropped his tools and ran toward her, closing the distance between them in seconds. Olena met him halfway, and they collided in an embrace that lifted her off her feet. "You came back," Quinn said, his face buried in her neck. "God, I missed you." "I missed you too," Olena said, holding him as tightly as she dared without hurting him. "Every day I missed you." They stood there for long moments, just holding each other, before finally pulling apart enough to properly look at one another. Quinn looked well. Olena was relieved to see. His face had filled out a bit, and he looked less haunted than he had when they first met. "You look happy," she observed. "I am," Quinn said, taking her hand and leading her toward the cabin. "Having something to look forward to, someone to build toward, it has changed everything. Come inside. I have so much to tell you." Over the next few hours, Quinn showed her everything he had accomplished in the weeks since her last visit. The workshop was nearly complete, and he had already begun working metal, creating simple tools that he planned to trade. His garden had yielded a good harvest, and he had preserved enough food to see him through the winter. He had even acquired a horse, a sturdy mare that would allow him to make supply runs more easily. "You have been very busy," Olena said, impressed by everything he had accomplished. "I had motivation," Quinn said with a smile. "I kept thinking about you, about us, about what kind of life we might build together. I know it seems foolish, planning for a future that might be impossible, but I could not help myself." Olena's heart clenched at his words. She needed to tell him about the military encampment, about the threat it represented. But she could not bring herself to shatter his happiness just yet. They prepared dinner together, falling easily back into the rhythm they had established during her last visit. It felt natural and right, working side by side, anticipating each other's movements and needs. After they ate, they moved to sit by the fire, and Quinn pulled Olena close, letting her lean against him. "I have something I need to tell you," Olena said finally, knowing she could not delay any longer. "Something you need to know." Quinn tensed slightly, hearing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it?" "There is a human military encampment about a day's journey north of here," Olena said carefully. "About 200 soldiers, well equipped and positioned for a long-term presence. They are pushing into territory that has been unclaimed buffer zone between human and orc lands. She felt Quinn's breathing change, becoming more controlled, the soldier in him coming to the forefront. How long have they been there? I do not know for certain. My clan only became aware of them recently. But based on the construction and supplies I saw, I would guess at least 2 or 3 weeks. Quinn was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. If they continue to expand, they will eventually come into conflict with your clan's territory. Yes, Olena confirmed. And your homestead is directly in their path. When that conflict comes, this entire region will become a war zone. I see, Quinn said softly. He pulled Olena closer, as if trying to protect her from the future they were discussing. What will your father do? He will defend our territory by any means necessary, Olena said. He has already begun preparing the clan's warriors. When the humans push far enough, we will push back. Hard. Quinn sighed, and Olena could feel the tension in his body. I left military service to escape war. I built this homestead to create something peaceful, something away from violence and conflict. But it seems war has followed me anyway. I am sorry, Olena said, turning in his arms so she could see his face. I wish I had better news to bring you. It is not your fault, Quinn assured her. You did not create this situation. If anything, you have given me warning that I would not otherwise have had. You should leave, Olena said, the words tearing at her even as she spoke them. Pack up what you can carry and move further into human territory, away from the border. It is the only way to ensure your safety. Quinn shook his head. I will not run again. I have spent too much of my life running from things. And besides, if I leave, how will I see you? How will we be together? We will figure something out, Olena said, though even she did not believe her own words. But your safety is more important than anything else. Quinn cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. You are what is important, not this cabin or this land or any of it. You are what I care about. Then you understand why you need to leave, Olena pressed. Because if war comes to this region, we will be on opposite sides, your people against mine. I could not bear to face you across a battlefield. Then we need to find another way, Quinn said firmly. Some solution that does not require us to be enemies or to be apart. What solution? Olena asked desperately. Our peoples have been at odds for generations. One military encampment is not going to change centuries of mistrust and hatred. Quinn was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. What if we tried to prevent the war before it starts? What if we could create a dialogue between your clan and the military leaders, find a way to establish clear boundaries and agreements that would prevent conflict? Olena stared at him, astonished by the suggestion. That is incredibly naive. Neither side would agree to negotiations. Maybe not at first, Quinn admitted. But what if we could show them that cooperation is possible, that humans and orcs can work together, can trust each other? We are living proof that the old hatreds do not have to define us. We are also secret from both our peoples, Olena pointed out. The moment either side learns about us, we will be seen as traitors. Unless we control the narrative, Quinn said, his voice taking on the intensity she associated with him working through a complex problem. What if we approached both sides with a proposal for peace talks, using ourselves as mediators? We have ties to both communities. We could serve as a bridge. Olena wanted to dismiss the idea as impossible, but part of her was intrigued despite herself. What if it could work? What if they could find a way to prevent the war and protect both their peoples? It would be incredibly dangerous, she said slowly. If either side decided we were a threat rather than an asset, they could eliminate us without hesitation. I know, Quinn said. But what is the alternative? We separate and spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have been. We stand by while our peoples slaughter each other. Or we try, knowing we might fail, but at least we tried. Olena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision before them. Every instinct told her that Quinn's plan was hopeless, that the forces moving toward war were too powerful to be stopped by two individuals. But another part of her, the part that had chosen to save a stranger's life and had fallen in love with a man she was supposed to hate, believed that maybe, just maybe, it was worth attempting. "If we do this, we would need to approach my father first," she said, opening her eyes. "He leads my clan, and nothing can proceed without his approval. But Quinn, you need to understand. My father is not a man who values mercy or compromise. He respects strength and loyalty above all else. Convincing him to even consider peace talks will be nearly impossible." "Then we make him see it as the strong choice," Quinn said. "War with the human military will cost your clan lives and resources. Even if you win, the cost will be high. But establishing clear boundaries through negotiation shows strategic thinking and leadership. It is not weakness to avoid an unnecessary war." "You do not know my father," Olena said quietly. "To him, any compromise with humans would be seen as weakness. He believes orcs should take what they need by force and negotiate from a position of absolute dominance." Quinn was quiet for a moment. "Then we need to give him a reason to listen. Something that makes peace the stronger option." They talked late into the night, planning and strategizing, trying to find an approach that might work. It was complicated by the fact that Quinn could not simply walk into an orc settlement without being killed on sight, and Olena could not approach the military encampment without being seen as an enemy scout. Finally, as dawn began to color the sky, they reached a decision. Olena would return to her clan and attempt to speak with her father privately, presenting the idea of peace negotiations as a strategic opportunity. She would not mention Quinn initially, framing it instead as intelligence she had gathered suggesting that the human military might be open to establishing formal boundaries. Once she had secured her father's interest, she would reveal that she had a contact who could serve as an intermediary. It was a fragile plan, built on hope and guesswork, but it was better than doing nothing. "When will you go?" Quinn asked as they prepared breakfast, both of them exhausted but too wired to sleep. "As soon as possible," Olena said. "My father will expect my report on the military encampment." "The sooner I approach him with this idea, the better." "And if he refuses to listen?" Quinn asked. "Then at least we tried," Olena said, echoing his words from the night before. "But Quinn, you need to promise me something. If this goes badly, if my father decides to attack your homestead, or if the military decides you are a threat, you will run. You will save yourself." Quinn crossed to her and pulled her into his arms. "Only if you promise the same. If your father exiles you or worse for trying to broker peace, you come here. We will leave together and build a life somewhere far from both our peoples." Olena nodded against his chest, knowing they were both making promises they might not be able to keep but needing to make them anyway. They spent the rest of the day together, neither wanting to part but knowing they must. When the sun began to set, Olena finally forced herself to gather her gear and prepare to leave. At the edge of the clearing, Quinn pulled her into one last embrace. "I love you," he said, the words clear and firm, no hesitation or doubt. "Whatever happens, I need you to know that." Olena felt tears prick at her eyes, an unusual occurrence for an orc woman. "I love you too," she whispered. "I will come back to you. Somehow I will find a way." "I will be waiting," Quinn promised. Then Olena was moving into the forest, forcing herself not to look back, carrying the weight of their future on her shoulders. The journey back to her clan's settlement felt both too long and too short. Olena used the time to refine her approach, to prepare arguments and counterarguments, to steel herself for what she knew would be one of the most difficult conversations of her life. When she arrived, she went immediately to her father's longhouse. Crag was in conference with several of his senior warriors, discussing defensive preparations. When Olena entered, he looked up with irritation at the interruption. "Father, I need to speak with you privately," Olena said, pitching her voice to carry authority despite her nervousness. "It concerns the military encampment." Crag studied her for a moment, then dismissed his warriors with a gesture. When they were alone, he turned his full attention to her. "Report," he commanded. Olena described what she had seen at the military encampment, providing detailed information on their numbers, equipment, and positioning. Her father listened with the attention of an experienced military leader, occasionally asking sharp questions that she answered as thoroughly as possible. "This confirms what our other scouts have reported," Crag said when she finished. "The humans are preparing to expand their territory. We will need to demonstrate our strength and push them back before they become entrenched." "Or we could negotiate," Olena said, her heart pounding. Crag's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Negotiate with humans. Hear me out," Olena said quickly, before her courage could fail. "War with this military force would cost us lives and resources. Even if we drive them back, they will return with reinforcements. But if we could establish clear boundaries through formal agreements, we could protect our territory without the cost of prolonged conflict." "You suggest we show weakness to our enemies," Crag said, his voice cold. "I suggest we show strategic thinking," Olena countered, channeling Quinn's arguments. "Avoiding an unnecessary war is not weakness, it is leadership. You would be protecting our people while maintaining our territorial integrity. That is the mark of a strong chief." Crag stood and began to pace, a sign that he was at least considering her words rather than dismissing them outright. "Even if I were inclined to consider this fool's errand, how would we approach the humans? They would see any orc envoy as a threat or a target." This was the moment Olena had been dreading. "I have a contact," she said carefully. "A human who lives near the border, someone who might be able to serve as an intermediary. He is former military and could approach the encampment leadership credibly." Crag stopped pacing and fixed her with a stare that seemed to see straight through her. "A human contact. How did you acquire this contact?" "I encountered him during a previous scouting mission," Olena said, sticking as close to the truth as possible. "He was being attacked by raiders. I intervened, and in the process we spoke. He is not aligned with any military or government force. He seeks only to live in peace." "And you trust this human?" Crag asked, his tone making it clear what he thought of that idea. "I believe he is sincere in his desire for peace," Olena said. "And I believe he could be useful to us." Crag was silent for a long, terrifying moment. Then he said, "There is something you are not telling me. I can see it in your eyes, hear it in your voice. What is your real interest in this human and in these peace negotiations?" Olena felt her breath catch. Her father was perceptive, more so than she had given him credit for. She could lie, could try to maintain the fiction that this was purely strategic. But she was tired of lying, tired of hiding the most important part of her life. "I care for him," she admitted, lifting her chin defiantly even as her heart raced with fear. "I have spent time with him, gotten to know him. He is a good man, father, and he has shown me that humans are not the monsters we have been taught they are." The silence that followed was deafening. Crag's expression went through several changes: surprise, disbelief, and finally settling into cold fury. "You have betrayed your clan," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "You have consorted with our enemies, and now you come to me with suggestions that would benefit your human lover." I have betrayed no one, Olena said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I have gathered intelligence, eliminated threats to our territory, and now I am trying to prevent a war that would cost many lives. The fact that I care for a human does not change any of that. It changes everything. Crag roared, his control finally breaking. You are my daughter, the daughter of the clan chief. You are supposed to be an example to our people, a symbol of orc pride and strength. Instead, you have shamed yourself and me by forming an attachment to a human. Why is it shameful to care for someone? Olena demanded, her own anger rising. Why is it wrong to see past old prejudices and recognize that humans and orcs are not so different? We both love, both hurt, both want safety and happiness for our people. Because it is our way, Crag shouted. Because our traditions and our strength are built on the understanding that orcs stand apart, that we are superior to the other races. To blur those lines is to weaken everything we are. Then perhaps what we are needs to change, Olena said, the words coming from somewhere deep inside her. Perhaps our traditions are not as perfect as we believe. Perhaps there is a better way. Crag stared at her, and for the first time in her life, Olena saw something other than disappointment or anger in her father's eyes. She saw hurt, genuine pain that his daughter had rejected everything he believed in. You sound like your grandmother, he said finally, and there was no warmth in the observation. She filled your mother's head with the same foolish ideas about peace and cooperation. I should have forbidden their contact with you when you were younger. Grandmother was wise, Olena said quietly. She understood that strength without compassion is just brutality. That is a lesson I wish you could learn. Crag turned away from her, his shoulders rigid. You have forced my hand, daughter. I cannot allow this relationship to continue. You will not see this human again. You will dedicate yourself to proper orc values and traditions. And in the spring, I will arrange a mating for you with a warrior of my choosing. Perhaps that will cure you of these foolish notions. No, Olena said, the word falling into the space between them like a stone. Crag turned back slowly, his expression dangerous. What did you say? I said no, Olena repeated, her voice stronger now. I will not abandon Quinn. I will not accept a mating arranged for political purposes, and I will not apologize for choosing love over tradition. Then you choose exile, Crag said flatly. If you will not abide by our ways, you cannot remain part of this clan. You have until dawn to gather your belongings and leave our territory. If you are found here after that, you will be treated as an enemy and dealt with accordingly. The finality of his words hit Olena like a physical blow. Exile. She had known it was a possibility, but hearing her father actually pronounce the sentence made it real in a way it had not been before. So be it, Olena said, proud that her voice did not shake. I will go. But father, know this. I hope the war you are preparing for does not cost you everything you hold dear. And I hope someday you will understand that love is not a weakness to be punished, but a strength to be honored. She turned and walked out of the longhouse, her head held high despite the tears that threatened to fall. Behind her, she heard her father call out one last time. You will regret this choice, Olena. Love fades, but exile is forever. Olena did not respond. She simply kept walking. Word of her exile spread through the clan with shocking speed. By the time Olena reached her dwelling to gather her belongings, a small crowd had gathered outside. Most looked at her with a mixture of pity and scorn. But her mother was there, and her sister Athia, and a few others who had always been kind to her. Her mother helped her pack in silence, her expression carefully neutral. When they had finished, Eartha pulled Olena into a tight embrace. Your grandmother would be proud of you, she whispered. You chose your heart over fear. That is true courage. Father says love fades, but exile is forever, Olena said, finally allowing the tears to fall. Your father knows nothing about love, Eartha said fiercely. Our mating was arranged, and while we have built a partnership, it has never been a love match. Do not let his bitterness poison your own joy. Athia stepped forward and pressed a small bag into Olena's hands. Coin and supplies, she said gruffly. Enough to get you through a few months if you are careful. And little sister, I am proud of you. I have never had the courage to defy father. I am glad you do. With her few belongings packed and her goodbyes said, Olena left the clan settlement as the sun set. She did not look back, knowing that doing so would only make the leaving harder. She traveled through the night, driven by a mixture of adrenaline and purpose. By dawn, she was standing at the edge of Quinn's clearing, exhausted both physically and emotionally. Quinn emerged from his cabin at the sound of her approach, and the moment he saw her face, he knew something had happened. He ran to her, catching her as her legs finally gave out. What happened? He asked urgently, holding her up. Olena, talk to me. I told my father, she said, her voice raw. I told him about us, about the peace negotiations. He exiled me. I can never go back. Quinn's arms tightened around her, and she felt him shaking with either rage or fear, possibly both. God, Olena, I am so sorry. This is my fault. If I had never, do not. Olena interrupted, pulling back to look at him. Do not apologize for giving me the best thing that has ever happened to me. Yes, I lost my clan, but I chose you, and I would make that choice again without hesitation. Quinn searched her face, and whatever he saw there seemed to reassure him. Then we will build a new life together, here or somewhere else, wherever you feel safe. We will figure it out. Olena nodded, exhaustion finally overwhelming her. Can I stay here, with you? For as long as you want, Quinn said, lifting her into his arms and carrying her toward the cabin. This is your home now. We will face whatever comes next together. He took her inside and settled her on the bed, removing her boots and armor with gentle hands. Olena was asleep before he had finished, her body shutting down after the emotional trauma of the last day. When she woke, it was late afternoon. Quinn was sitting in a chair beside the bed, a book in his hands, clearly keeping watch over her. The moment he noticed she was awake, he set the book aside. How are you feeling? He asked. Olena took inventory of herself. She was sore, hungry, and there was a deep ache in her chest where the connection to her clan used to be. But underneath all of that, she felt something unexpected, relief. Free, she said, surprised by her own answer. I feel free. For the first time in my life, I am not trying to live up to impossible expectations or hide who I really am. It hurts to have lost my family, but there is also freedom in no longer having to pretend. Quinn smiled and took her hand. I am glad you feel that way, because I have been thinking about what comes next and I have some ideas. But first, you need to eat. Come on. He helped her up and led her to the table where he had prepared a simple but substantial meal. As they ate, Quinn outlined his thoughts. Your father will not pursue peace negotiations now, and approaching the military encampment without your clan's backing would be pointless. So we need to let go of that plan, at least for now. Instead, we focus on building a life here. We have this homestead, we have each other, and we have the skills to survive and even thrive. It will not be easy, especially if war does come to this region, but we will manage. What about your peace? Olena asked. You said you came here to build something peaceful away from violence. Now you are harboring an exiled orc in the middle of what could become a war zone. Peace is not about location, Quinn said thoughtfully. It is about state of mind, about building rather than destroying. As long as I am with you, as long as we are creating something together, I have my peace. Olena felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. You are an idealist, she said with a small smile. I prefer optimist, Quinn corrected, grinning. But yes, probably. Is that so bad? No, Olena said softly. It is one of the things I love about you. Over the following weeks, Olena and Quinn established their new life together. Olena's strength and skills proved invaluable in completing the workshop and preparing the homestead for winter. She hunted, bringing back deer and other game that supplemented their food stores. She also began studying the healer's guide Quinn had given her, fascinated by the human approaches to medicine and eager to learn new techniques. Quinn, in turn, taught her more about metalworking and crafting. He showed her how to work the forge, how to shape hot metal into useful forms. Olena had a natural talent for it, her orc strength allowing her to work larger pieces than Quinn could manage alone. They fell into easy domesticity, sharing chores and meals, talking late into the night, and learning more about each other with every passing day. The physical attraction between them remained strong, but they took their time exploring it, building intimacy gradually and with care. One evening, about a month after Olena's exile, they were sitting by the fire when Quinn suddenly stood and crossed to his shelf of belongings. He pulled out a small wooden box and returned to kneel beside her chair. "Olena Ashford," he said formally, "I know that we have not been together long by conventional standards. I know that our situation is complicated and uncertain. But I also know that I love you more than I have ever loved anyone or anything. You are my partner, my friend, and my hope for the future. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple ring made of silver, engraved with a pattern of leaves and vines. It was beautiful in its simplicity, clearly crafted by Quinn's own hands. Olena stared at the ring, then at Quinn, her heart so full she could barely breathe. Marriage was not a tradition among her people, but she understood what it meant to humans. It was a promise, a commitment to build a life together and face whatever came side by side. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. Quinn slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her down to the floor beside him and kissed her with all the love and passion he had been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I want you," he said quietly. "I have wanted you since the first moment I saw you. But only if you want this too. I will never pressure you or make you feel obligated." "I want you too," Olena said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion and desire. "I have never been with anyone before, and that frightens me a little, but I trust you, Quinn. I trust you with my heart and my body." Quinn stood and offered her his hand. "Then come to bed with me. We will take it slow, and we will discover together what brings us both joy." Olena took his hand and let him lead her to their bed. What followed was tender and passionate, awkward at moments as all first times are, but ultimately beautiful. They learned each other's bodies with patient hands and whispered words, finding pleasure in giving as much as receiving. When they finally came together completely, Olena felt a sense of rightness and completion that brought tears to her eyes. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the blankets, skin to skin, hearts beating in sync. "I love you," Olena whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for showing me what love can be." "I love you too," Quinn said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after, we will build our life together, Olena, and it will be extraordinary." Winter came early and hard that year. Snow fell in heavy blankets, transforming Quinn's clearing into a pristine white wonderland. Olena and Quinn were well prepared, with plenty of food stored and enough firewood to last through the coldest months. They spent the long winter evenings reading together, with Quinn teaching Olena to read and write the human script. She proved an apt pupil, her natural intelligence and curiosity driving her to learn quickly. They also used the time to plan for the future. Quinn wanted to expand the homestead, to build a proper house rather than just a cabin, and to increase their production of metalwork for trade. Olena suggested they might also sell herbal remedies and medicines, using the knowledge from her healer's guide combined with what she remembered from her grandmother's teachings. It was a peaceful time, isolated from the outside world by snow and distance. But they both knew it could not last forever. Spring came with the sound of melting ice and the return of birdsong. As the snow receded, Quinn and Olena began to venture beyond their clearing more regularly, hunting and foraging and generally reacquainting themselves with the world beyond their winter sanctuary. It was during one of these expeditions, about 2 weeks after the thaw, that they encountered trouble. They were checking Quinn's trap line in the forest when they heard voices speaking in the Orcish language. Olena immediately signaled Quinn to be quiet and still, and they hid behind a cluster of trees. 3 orc warriors emerged into view, moving through the forest with purpose. Olena recognized one of them, Groth, the warrior who had taunted her during training. "The chieftain wants this entire area swept," Groth was saying to his companions. "The humans have been pushing their patrols further into the buffer zone. We need to show them that this territory is not available for their taking." "What about the exile?" one of the other warriors asked. "Crag's daughter. Have you heard any news of her?" Groth laughed mockingly. "Probably dead by now." No orc can survive alone through a winter, especially not a soft one like Olena. Good riddance, I say. She was always more trouble than she was worth. Olena felt Quinn tense beside her, clearly fighting the urge to defend her honor. She placed a calming hand on his arm and shook her head. They could not risk confrontation, not 3 against 2. The orc warriors moved on, their voices fading into the distance. When it was safe, Quinn and Olena quietly made their way back to the homestead. "They were scouting," Olena said as soon as they were inside. "That means my father is preparing for action against the human military. The war we tried to prevent is coming." Quinn nodded grimly. "We need to decide what we are going to do. This homestead is not defensible against a military force, orc or human. If fighting comes to this area, we will be caught in the middle." "We could leave," Olena suggested, though the words pained her. "Move deeper into human territory, far from the border." "We could," Quinn agreed. "Or we could try one more time to stop this war before it starts." Olena looked at him in surprise. "How? My father will not listen to me, and the humans have no reason to trust either of us." "We go directly to the military encampment," Quinn said. "I am a former soldier with knowledge of the area and the orc clans. They might listen to me. And if you are with me, you can provide intelligence from the orc perspective. Together, we might be able to convince them that there are alternatives to war." "It is incredibly dangerous," Olena said. "They could kill you on sight for consorting with an orc. They could kill both of us." "I know," Quinn said. "But what is the alternative? We run and the war happens anyway. At least if we try, we might save lives on both sides, including people we care about." Olena thought of her mother, her sisters, the members of her former clan who had been kind to her. She thought of the human soldiers in that encampment, many of them probably as tired of war as Quinn had been. Did she not owe it to all of them to at least try? "All right," she said finally. "We try. But Quinn, if it looks like they are going to kill you, I will fight. I will not stand by and watch you die." "Fair enough," Quinn said with a slight smile. "And if they come for you, I will do the same." They spent the next day preparing for the journey and planning their approach. Quinn would go first, requesting an audience with the camp's commanding officer. Once he had established basic trust, he would introduce Olena as his source of intelligence on the orc clans. It was risky, but it was the best plan they had. The journey to the military encampment took a full day. As they drew near, Olena hung back in the forest while Quinn approached openly, his hands clearly visible and carrying no weapons beyond a simple knife. He was immediately challenged by sentries, which was expected. Quinn identified himself as a former soldier and requested to speak with the commanding officer on a matter of strategic importance. After some back and forth, and what appeared to be consultation with someone higher up the chain of command, Quinn was escorted into the camp. Olena waited in the forest, her heart pounding. If something went wrong, if they decided Quinn was a threat or a spy, she might never see him again. The wait felt eternal, every minute stretching into an hour. Finally, after what must have been 2 or 3 hours but felt like days, Quinn emerged from the camp and made his way back to the forest edge. Olena met him partway, relief flooding through her. "How did it go?" she asked urgently. "Better than I expected," Quinn said. "The commanding officer is a Captain Morris. He is a pragmatist, not an ideologue. When I explained that I had intelligence suggesting the orc clans were preparing for a defensive action, he was willing to listen. He agreed to meet with you, but only under controlled circumstances. You would need to come into the camp, surrender any weapons, and submit to being guarded at all times. He wants me to walk into a human military camp unarmed and surrounded by people who might see me as an enemy," Olena said flatly. "That is asking a lot." "I know," Quinn said. "And I will understand if you decide it is too much risk." But Captain Morris seemed genuinely interested in avoiding unnecessary conflict. "I think he sees the same thing we do, that war would be costly for both sides." Olena considered this. Everything in her training and instincts screamed that walking into that camp was suicide. But she had chosen to trust Quinn, had chosen to believe that there were humans worth knowing and worth protecting. Now was the time to prove she meant it. "I will do it," she said. "But you stay by my side the entire time. If they try to separate us, the deal is off." "Agreed," Quinn said. They approached the camp together, and Olena felt dozens of pairs of eyes tracking her movements as she emerged from the tree line. She heard mutters and exclamations from the soldiers, many of whom had probably never seen an orc up close outside of combat. She was met by a group of armed guards who politely but firmly took her weapons. Quinn stayed close, as promised, one hand resting gently on her back in a gesture of support and solidarity. Captain Morris turned out to be a weathered man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a military bearing. He studied Olena with undisguised interest, but without the hatred or fear she had expected. "So you are the orc woman who has been living with Quinn Marlowe," he said without preamble. "I confess, when he told me, I thought he might have lost his mind during his years of isolation. But here you are, flesh and blood." "I am Olena Ashford," Olena said, lifting her chin, "formerly of Cragg's clan. I am here because I believe war between your forces and my former people can be avoided if both sides are willing to negotiate. And why should I trust an orc exile?" Morris asked, though his tone was more curious than hostile. "For all I know, this could be an elaborate trap. If I wanted to trap you, Captain, there are far easier methods than walking into your camp and giving up my weapons," Olena pointed out. "I am here in good faith, because I have seen that humans are not the monsters my people believe them to be. I hope you will extend me the same courtesy by listening to what I have to say." Morris studied her for a long moment, then gestured to a tent. "Very well, let us talk. But understand that I make no promises beyond hearing you out." Inside the tent, with Quinn beside her and guards at the entrance, Olena explained the situation from the orc perspective. She described her father's view of the human expansion, the preparations being made for defensive action, and the likely escalation if both sides continued on their current course. My father is not a man who backs down from confrontation, Olena said honestly. He views any encroachment on what he sees as orc territory as an act of war. But he is also a strategist. If you could establish clear boundaries and agree to respect them, he might be willing to accept a negotiated peace rather than risk costly conflict. And you believe you could convince him to negotiate? Morris asked skeptically. No, Olena admitted. My father exiled me for the crime of caring for a human. He would not listen to anything I had to say, but there are others in the clan who might have influence. My mother, for example. She values peace more than my father admits, and she has his ear in private matters. Morris leaned back in his chair, thinking. Even if I were inclined to pursue this, I do not have the authority to negotiate territory boundaries. That would need to come from higher up in the command structure, possibly even from the regional governor. Then speak to your superiors, Quinn said. Make them see that investing in diplomacy now could save countless lives and resources later. You were a soldier long enough to know that wars are expensive in every way that matters. Morris nodded slowly. I was, and you are not wrong, but getting the bureaucracy to move on something like this takes time. Time we might not have if the orcs are already preparing for action. Then we need to buy time, Olena said. What if I were to return to the border region and monitor my father's preparations? I could send word if an attack appears imminent, giving you advance warning. That would demonstrate good faith and provide you with the time you need to pursue diplomatic channels. Morris looked between Olena and Quinn, clearly weighing the risks and benefits. You would essentially be spying on your own people for us. That is what you are proposing. I am proposing that I try to prevent a war that would hurt everyone I care about, Olena corrected. That includes members of my former clan and the soldiers in this camp. If providing information accomplishes that goal, then yes, I will do it. The captain was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, All right. I will send word up the chain of command recommending that we pursue diplomatic options with the orc clans. In the meantime, you monitor the situation and keep us informed of any imminent threats. But understand this, if you betray us, if this information is used against us, I will personally lead the force that hunts you down. Understood, Olena said. Morris turned to Quinn. And you, what is your stake in all this? Olena is my wife, Quinn said simply. Where she goes, I go. What she risks, I risk. Morris's eyebrows rose. Wife, you married an orc. I married the woman I love, Quinn corrected. Her species is irrelevant. Morris shook his head in disbelief but did not argue the point. Very well, you two have your assignment. Report back in 2 weeks with an update. If you have not returned by then, I will assume you have been compromised and proceed with standard military protocols. They were escorted out of the camp. Olena's weapons returned to her at the perimeter. Once they were safely back in the forest, Quinn pulled her into a tight embrace. That was terrifying, he admitted. I was not sure he would listen. Neither was I, Olena said, but at least now we have a chance. A small one, but it is more than we had before. They returned to their homestead and began the work of monitoring the border region. Olena used her knowledge of orc patrol patterns to avoid detection while gathering intelligence. She watched as her father's warriors prepared for conflict, noting troop movements and supply stockpiles. It pained her to essentially spy on her own people, but she reminded herself that she was trying to save them from a war that might destroy them. After 10 days of observation, Olena noticed a significant escalation in preparations. Her father was gathering his forces for what appeared to be a major action. She and Quinn immediately set out for the military encampment to deliver their report. Captain Morris listened to her intelligence with grave attention. How much time do we have? He asked. days at most, Olena said. My father is a cautious commander. He will want everything in place before he moves. But once he commits, the attack will come swiftly. Morris nodded. I have news as well. My superiors have agreed to pursue diplomatic options, but with conditions. They want assurances from the Orc side that any agreements will be honored. They also want a face-to-face meeting with Orc leadership to establish terms. My father will never agree to that, Olena said immediately. He would see it as walking into a trap. Then we need someone he trusts to serve as an intermediary, Morris said. Someone who can vouch for our intentions. My mother, Olena said suddenly. If we could get a message to my mother, she might be able to convince my father to at least hear the proposal. She has influence with him that others do not. And how do you propose we get a message to her without alerting the entire clan? Quinn asked. Olena thought for a moment. I would have to go myself. Sneak into the settlement, speak with her privately, and leave before anyone else knows I was there. That is incredibly dangerous, Quinn protested. If you are caught, your father would— I know what my father would do, Olena interrupted, but it is the only way. My mother would not trust a message from a human source, and she would not meet with strangers. It has to be me. After much debate and planning, they decided to attempt the infiltration that night. Olena would enter the settlement alone while Quinn and a small group of soldiers provided support from a distance. If things went wrong, they would attempt a rescue, though everyone acknowledged the chances of success were slim. As night fell, Olena prepared herself mentally and emotionally for what might be the last time she saw her home. Quinn helped her check her gear, his hands lingering on her face and arms as if trying to memorize the feel of her. Come back to me, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Whatever happens in there, find a way to come back. I will, Olena promised, pulling him into a deep kiss. I have too much to live for to give up easily. She slipped into the settlement as darkness fell, using paths and shadows she had known since childhood. The settlement was quiet, most of the clan already asleep after a day of preparation and training. Olena made her way to her mother's dwelling, a separate structure near the longhouse where the chieftain's wife had her own space. She entered silently and found her mother sitting by a low fire, mending clothing by the dim light. Eartha looked up at the sound of movement and her eyes widened in shock. Olena, she breathed. What are you doing here? If your father finds you, I know the risk, mother, Olena said quietly, kneeling beside her. But I had to come. I need your help to prevent a war. Quickly, she explained everything. Her relationship with Quinn, the peace negotiations, the willingness of the human military to establish formal boundaries, and the need for Orc leadership to engage in talks. Eartha listened in silence, her expression cycling through various emotions. When Olena finished, her mother sat back and sighed heavily. You ask me to betray your father's trust, Eartha said. I ask you to save his life and the lives of our people, Olena corrected. The human military is larger and better equipped than father realizes. Even if we win an initial engagement, they will bring reinforcements. This war will bleed our clan dry. But if we can establish peace, we protect our territory and our people without the cost of conflict. Eartha was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Your grandmother used to say that the hardest battles are not fought with weapons but with choices, she said finally. She believed that true courage was choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. I am going to honor her memory by doing what I believe she would do. She looked at Olena directly. I will speak with your father. I cannot promise he will listen, but I will try. If he agrees to meet with the human leadership, where should that meeting take place? They discussed logistics for several minutes, agreeing on a neutral location and a time 3 days hence. If Crag agreed to attend, Eartha would send a signal. She would place a specific colored cloth on the entrance to her dwelling that would be visible from the forest edge. "Thank you, Mother," Olena whispered, embracing her tightly. "I know what this costs you. Go now before someone discovers you," Eartha urged. "And Olena, I am proud of you, not just for your courage, but for choosing love and hope over hatred and tradition. You are more like your grandmother than I ever realized." Olena slipped out of the dwelling and made her way back through the settlement. She was almost clear when she heard a shout behind her. She had been spotted. She ran, not bothering with stealth now, just speed. Behind her, she heard more shouts and the sound of pursuit. She crashed into the forest, using her knowledge of the terrain to gain distance. But she knew her pursuers would not give up easily. Then she heard Quinn's voice calling her name. She adjusted her course toward the sound and burst into a small clearing where Quinn and 3 human soldiers waited with horses. "Go!" Quinn shouted, pulling her up onto his horse even as arrows whistled past them. They took off at a gallop, the soldiers providing covering fire as they retreated. They did not stop until they were well clear of Orc territory, finally slowing when it became clear they were not being pursued. Olena slid off the horse on shaking legs, and Quinn was immediately there to catch her. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, checking her for injuries. "No," Olena said. "Just frightened. I did not expect to be discovered." "But did you succeed?" one of the soldiers asked. "Will the Orcs negotiate?" "I do not know," Olena admitted. "My mother will try to convince my father. We will have our answer in 3 days. Those 3 days were the longest of Olena's life." She and Quinn stayed near the military encampment, waiting for word. Captain Morris had assembled a small diplomatic team, ready to move at a moment's notice if the Orcs agreed to meet. On the morning of the 3rd day, Olena and Quinn rode to a point where they could observe her mother's dwelling through a looking glass, and there, hanging from the entrance, was the colored cloth they had agreed upon. "He agreed," Olena breathed, hardly daring to believe it. "My father agreed to negotiate." They rushed back to the encampment with the news, and Captain Morris immediately mobilized his diplomatic team. The meeting was set for that afternoon at a neutral location midway between the 2 territories. Olena and Quinn accompanied the human delegation, serving as mediators and translators. When they arrived at the meeting site, they found Crag already there with his own retinue of warriors. Eartha stood beside her husband, and when she saw Olena, she gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Crag's expression was stony when he looked at his daughter, but he did not order her away. Instead, he turned his attention to Captain Morris. "I am told you wish to discuss boundaries," Crag said without preamble. "I do," Morris confirmed. "My superiors are prepared to formally recognize certain territories as under Orc sovereignty in exchange for agreements not to interfere with human settlements and trade routes. We believe establishing clear lines will prevent future conflicts." What followed was several hours of intense negotiation. There were moments when Olena was certain the talks would break down, when pride and old hatreds threatened to overwhelm pragmatism. But slowly, painfully, a framework began to emerge. The humans would withdraw their military presence from certain areas that were clearly within traditional Orc territory. In exchange, the Orcs would agree not to raid human settlements or interfere with trade caravans traveling through designated routes. A formal treaty would be drafted, signed by both sides, and violations would be addressed through a joint council rather than immediate military action. It was not perfect, and both sides had to make compromises that sat uncomfortably. But it was peace, real and tangible, built on mutual recognition rather than fear and hostility. As the meeting was concluding, Crag finally turned to face Olena directly. "You did this," he said, and she could not quite read his tone. You forced this confrontation, this compromise. I tried to prevent a war that would have destroyed us both, Olena said, meeting her father's eyes without flinching. I do not regret it. Cragg studied her for a long moment. Your grandmother would have done the same, he said finally. I did not understand her in life, and I confess I still do not understand you. But perhaps there is wisdom in your approach that I am too old and set in my ways to see. It was not an apology or even an acceptance, but it was more than Olena had dared hope for. Eartha stepped forward and embraced her daughter openly, not caring what anyone thought. You have done well, my child. Come visit when you can. You will always have family here, regardless of what your father decreed. With the treaty framework agreed upon, the two parties separated. Olena and Quinn returned to the military encampment with Captain Morris, where the captain offered them his sincere thanks. You two risked everything to make this possible, Morris said. The region owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid. We just want to live in peace, Quinn said simply. Everything else was in service of that goal. They returned to their homestead as the first stars were appearing in the sky. Inside their cabin, with the fire crackling and the familiar comfort of their shared space around them, Olena finally allowed herself to relax. We did it, she said wonderingly. We actually prevented the war. You did it, Quinn corrected, pulling her into his arms. Your courage, your willingness to risk everything for what you believed was right. I was just along for the ride. We did it together, Olena insisted. Everything we have accomplished has been together. I could not have done any of this without you. Quinn kissed her softly. Then together is how we will continue. Building our life, our home, our future. Together. Over the following months, the peace treaty was formalized and implemented. There were difficulties, certainly. Centuries of mistrust and hostility could not be erased with a single document. But the framework held, and slowly, tentatively, humans and orcs in the border region began to interact in ways that were not violent. Olena and Quinn became informal ambassadors of sorts, their home serving as a neutral meeting ground for representatives from both sides. Quinn's metalwork became sought after by both human and orc traders, and Olena's healing skills earned her respect from people on both sides of the newly established borders. They also began to build the larger life they had dreamed of. With help from both human neighbors and some of Olena's former clan members who had never supported her exile, they constructed a proper house to replace the cabin. They expanded their gardens and their workshop, creating a homestead that was not just surviving but thriving. A year after the treaty was signed, Olena discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She had heard that children of mixed heritage were rare, and she did not know what to expect. But Quinn's response when she told him erased all her fears. A child, he breathed, placing his hand on her still flat stomach with wonder. Our child. Olena, this is the most incredible gift. You are not worried, she asked, about what they will be, how they will fit in either of our worlds. I am worried, Quinn admitted honestly. But I am also hopeful. Our child will be a living symbol of what we have built, proof that love can bridge any divide. And they will have us to guide them, to teach them to be proud of both their heritages. Their daughter was born in the spring, a healthy baby with her mother's green-tinged skin and her father's dark eyes. She had tiny tusks that would grow more prominent as she aged, and pointed ears that sat close to her head. They named her Vera, meaning truth, because her very existence was a truth that both their peoples needed to acknowledge. Vera's birth was met with mixed reactions from both communities. Some saw her as an abomination, proof that the mixing of species was wrong. But others saw her as Quinn and Olena did, as hope, as possibility, as the first step toward a future where ancient hatreds could be set aside. On Vera's first birthday, they held a celebration that brought together humans and orcs in a way that would have been unthinkable just 2 years earlier. Olena's mother came, and her sisters, and even some of the warriors from her former clan. Captain Morris brought gifts from the military encampment, and human neighbors from nearby settlements attended as well. As Olena watched her daughter being passed from human to orc arms, being cooed over and celebrated by people from both communities, she felt a profound sense of peace and rightness. Quinn came to stand beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "I am thinking about how far we have come," Olena said. "About how much has changed since the day I saw you fighting those raiders and chose to help instead of walking away. That single choice led to all of this." "You regret any of it?" Quinn asked. "The exile, the struggles, the risks we took?" Olena turned to face him fully, cupping his face in her hands. "I regret nothing. You showed me what love could be, what courage really means. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible and a family I never knew I needed. How could I regret any of that?" Quinn kissed her deeply, not caring who was watching. When they broke apart, he smiled. "I love you, Olena Marlowe, today, tomorrow, and every day for the rest of our lives." "And I love you," Olena said. "My husband, my partner, my heart. Thank you for seeing past what I was supposed to be and loving who I actually am." They turned back to watch the celebration, their daughter at the center of it all, and Olena knew that whatever challenges the future held, they would face them together. They had built something extraordinary from nothing, had created peace where there had been only conflict, and had proven that love could indeed conquer even the most insurmountable obstacles. Their story was not the end, but rather a beginning. A beginning of a new era where humans and orcs could coexist, could build together, could choose understanding over hatred. And it had all started with a choice, a moment of courage and a trembling admission that would change 2 lives forever. "I have never wanted anyone like this before." Those words, spoken in vulnerability and hope, had been the seed from which everything else grew. And as Olena stood with her husband, watching their daughter laugh in the arms of her grandmother, she knew that those words would continue to echo through the generations to come. A reminder that love, in all its forms, was the most powerful force in any world.